Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a room that smells like jasmine and sandalwood, where the cushions are embroidered, the lamps glow with soft oil flames, and the world outside falls quiet behind a screen of banana leaves. The air is warm, not hot, and there's a slow hum of flute music somewhere in the courtyard. You're not at a spa, you're not in a temple. You're in the ancient bedroom of someone who lives by a guidebook older than most of recorded history. A book you've heard of, probably chuckled about, maybe even peeked at. But tonight, we're going deeper. Because the Kama Sutra isn't just that book full of twisty human origami. It's not a punchline. It's not a stunt. It's a quiet little manual that takes harmony, hygiene, hugs, and human intimacy very seriously. And you probably won't survive this twist. It was written by a celibate guy who basically told people how to enjoy love without ever sampling it himself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing where this sleepy little caravan travels each night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in India, sometime around the 3rd century CE, maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later. Historians still argue over exactly when, but what's certain is that this is a golden age for poetry, science, and philosophy. The Gupta Empire is blooming, cities are humming, and people are deeply interested in how to live well. Not just survive, but live beautifully. That's where the Kama Sutra comes in. The word Kama itself doesn't mean sex. It means desire, pleasure, not just physical, but emotional and aesthetic. The smell of a ripe mango, the curve of a finely crafted clay cup, the sound of someone laughing behind a silk curtain. Kama is what makes you feel alive, and yes, sometimes also what makes you want to take your clothes off. Now imagine you're a young noble, newlywed, moving into your own home. You're expected to know not just how to run the household or recite poetry, but also how to kiss, how to initiate, how to respond. You're given a tutor, not for swordplay, but for seduction. Because, awkward as it may seem to modern ears, lovemaking is considered an art, a life skill, and people are expected to get good at it. This is where the Kama Sutra shines, not just because of its descriptions of intimacy, but because of how seriously it takes human connection. It's not written like a diary or a doctor's manual. It's organized, almost like a textbook, with chapters, sections, subheadings. Vatsyayana didn't mess around, except, plot twist, he kinda did. Because the author of the Kama Sutra was almost certainly a celibate scholar who wrote the most famous intimacy guide of all time while living a life of abstinence. Vatsyayana himself warns you not to take the text too literally, that his work is a compilation of earlier authors, refined and reshaped, and should be read like a window into how the world might work, not a rule book. You're lying back now on a low-cushioned platform bed, draped in thin fabric. The air smells like rosewater. A servant places a tray nearby, spiced milk, cardamom sweets, a tiny copper pot of oil with floating petals. These are part of the Kama Sutra's world too. Before the mechanics, there is preparation, attention to mood, cleanliness, harmony. You stretch your arms out. There's no hurry. This is not a world of fast, forgettable encounters. It's slow, intentional. Even the lighting matters. It's recommended that the room be soft lit, not to hide flaws, but to create ambience. Nothing harsh, nothing jarring, just shadows and flickers. One anecdote from the erotic spirit through history tells of a courtesan who refused to see her client until he had chewed the proper betel leaf, oiled his beard, and composed a 3-line poem in her honor. He waited 3 hours before being admitted. She later told her attendants, if a man cannot prepare, how will he please? And somehow you believe her. Another little known tidbit. The Kama Sutra suggests that one of the first lessons a student should learn is how to sleep attractively. Yes, you're told to practice lying on your side, draping your arm gracefully, with half-shut eyes, breathing softly, as if you are a sculpture of longing. Your sleep position is a form of communication. This isn't just about sex. It's about presence, about being attuned to beauty, rhythm, and energy. Historians still argue whether the Kama Sutra was truly read by the common person or was mostly an elite fantasy. But what's clear is that its worldview permeated the arts, the court, even temple rituals. Outside your bedroom, someone plays the vina, a gentle stringed lullaby. A breeze stirs the curtain. You think about how different this all is from today's culture of instant gratification. Here, intimacy is a process, a journey, something to be studied, practiced, even respected. And as you settle deeper into your cushioned corner of this ancient world, you realize something. This book, this manual, isn't just about performance. It's about understanding that love, real love, starts long before a single touch. You're still lounging in that soft, rose-scented room. The fabric's now cool against your skin. The shadows play gently on the walls, and the world outside, the carts, the cows, the clamor, is muffled. You feel strangely peaceful. And now it's time to meet the man behind the curtain. Vatsyayana. If you picture him as some wild, toga-wearing guru whispering seductive secrets in a smoky temple, well, no. Reset the image. He was likely a Brahmin scholar, soft-spoken, more ink-stained than incense-bathed, and almost certainly celibate. A man who believed that life had four goals: dharma, duty; artha, kama, pleasure; and moksha, liberation, and that a truly balanced human should pursue all four in harmony, not just chase one like a chicken on fire. So here he is, somewhere in India, perhaps in a quiet monastery or a well-furnished home, compiling centuries of ideas into one book. He wasn't the first to write about Kama, not even close. He was more like the final editor of a much longer conversation. And in his own words, he says, "This work is not intended for libertines, but for the well-rounded person." Imagine someone writing a guide to love by candlelight, cross-referencing ancient texts, squinting over palm leaf manuscripts, occasionally pausing to feed the courtyard peacocks. He pulls in stories from poets, priests, even courtesans. He sorts them, trims them, and like an early human version of a content curator, presents it all as a complete how-to on emotional and physical connection. And Vatsyayana, bless his careful soul, doesn't just throw down positions and poems. He outlines who this book is for: the noble householder, the artful courtesan, the dutiful wife, even the wandering bachelor with too much time on his hands. Everyone gets a chapter. Well, almost everyone. We'll get to the exclusions later. In this delicate, organized manuscript, he divides pleasure into categories. Not just physical acts, but conversations, glances, memories. A whisper can be kama, a gentle breeze at the right time, a perfectly timed letter left under a flower pot. In fact, how you say something might be as important as what you do with your hands. But here's the twist. There's a moral core to this book. Kama is not indulgence. It's discipline. It's learning to appreciate the scent of jasmine without eating the whole bush, if you will. That's why many scholars today compare the Kama Sutra to yoga or martial arts. There's form, technique, flow. One anecdote from Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings references how in royal Indian courts, even young princes were encouraged to study portions of the Kama Sutra, not so they could carouse, but so they could avoid being terrible husbands. The worst kind of ruler, they believed, was one who didn't understand human emotions. And if that meant practicing your compliments on a bronze mirror, so be it. And this is where the Kama Sutra sets itself apart from Western equivalents. It's not obsessed with purity, shame, or punishment. It doesn't treat intimacy as something to fear or conceal, but as one of many expressions of life, like music, cooking, or poetry. Of course, not all scholars agree on the tone. Michel Foucault, in his writings on the history of sexuality, pointed out that while the Kama Sutra appears open, it still reflects a structured, hierarchical society. Not everyone had the same access to pleasure. Gender roles, class expectations, and even caste rules filtered what kind of kama you were allowed to enjoy. Still, Vatsyayana offers a surprisingly open window. In one lesser-known chapter, he writes about the friend counselor, usually a woman, who acts as a go-between for lovers. She arranges the meeting, confirms the vibes, even critiques the technique after. One case study mentions a woman named Revati, who was known for rating her friends' suitors on a 5-point system, like a human Yelp review, but for 4th century romantic skill. And here's your quirky tidbit. One passage advises that the best time for intimate encounters is not at night, as you might assume, but after lunch on a cool day, with mango juice available. Why? Because the body is relaxed, the room is still bright, and digestion keeps people humble. It's intimacy, siesta style. Now picture Vatsyayana himself, stoic, maybe a little nearsighted, listening as students recite verses back to him, correcting posture, reminding them to wash their feet before entering a woman's room. Not exactly steamy stuff, but deeply sincere. And then, perhaps with a little smile, he scribbles this one final thought. Pleasure should be treated like a fine flower, beautiful, fleeting, and not to be stomped on by the unwashed foot of carelessness. It's oddly moving, not lustful, not voyeuristic, just thoughtful. The Kama Sutra asks you to pause, to breathe, to notice. Even in something as intimate as a shared glance, there's meaning. So as the lamps burn lower in your ancient room and the fan clinks rhythmically in the corner, you start to feel that maybe this isn't just about bedroom etiquette. It's about living attentively, about listening with your whole body. And tomorrow, maybe you'll even practice the ancient art of walking into a room with grace, adjusting your shawl, and delivering a compliment like it's a finely tuned poem. Or not. But hey, you're learning. You're still reclining on that carved sandalwood divan, and the light has shifted ever so slightly, more golden now, syrupy, like late afternoon honey sliding down the wall. Somewhere in the background, soft ankle bells tinkle in rhythm with footsteps, someone moving gracefully down a hallway. You hear a muted laugh. It's not a flirtatious giggle, it's amused, confident, like someone just outwitted a suitor using nothing but a pun and a knowing eyebrow raise. Welcome to the world of courtesans. Now, in today's mind, the word courtesan might conjure images from costume dramas, lace and scandal, powdered wigs and whispered affairs. But in the India of the Kama Sutra, these women were a different species entirely. They were in many ways the philosophers of passion, scholars of intimacy, equal parts artist, therapist, and conversational sniper. The Kama Sutra dedicates entire chapters to them, not as a warning, not as a scandalous footnote, but as an integral part of the romantic ecosystem. And no, not all courtesans were high-ranking adored geniuses. Some led harsh lives, lived under male control, or vanished without record. Historians still argue whether the ideal courtesan described in the Kama Sutra was more aspirational than realistic. But one thing is clear. When it worked, it really worked. These women held power, and not the soft, decorative kind. Take, for example, the figure of Amrapali, an iconic courtesan of Vaishali, renowned not just for her beauty, but for her wit and diplomacy. Local kings competed for her attention. According to later Buddhist texts, even Gautama Buddha visited her, and she later renounced wealth to join his order. Whether all the stories are true is unclear, but the mythos of the courtesan wasn't built on anatomy. It was built on mind, presence, and strategy. You find yourself in one of their salons, maybe Ujjain or Pataliputra. The room smells of rosewater and neem. Oil lamps flicker through colored glass. A low table bears silver bowls of sugar-dusted almonds, tamarind syrup, and crushed hibiscus wine. You sit cross-legged, nervous. The courtesans here are casually discussing Sanskrit wordplay, while two men politely argue over the rhythm of a verse. A woman in a teal sari rests her chin in her hand and watches you. Not with hunger, but with analysis. She's deciding whether your laugh is genuine, whether you've actually read Kalidasa or just quoted the popular line. Here, charm isn't just expected, it's required, and that's by design. According to Vatsyayana, courtesans were expected to master the Chatushashti Kalas, the 64 arts. Yes, 64. These included singing, dancing, painting, perfumery, tailoring, puzzle solving, storytelling, disguise, riddle composition, puppetry, and, my personal favorite, how to train a parrot to recite poetry. Not a typo. A parrot, reciting, poetry. Because in this world, intimacy wasn't just physical, it was performative. Courtesans were entertainers, advisors, memory keepers, and occasionally the last honest voice in a nobleman's ear. Their homes were places of music, debate, and yes, carefully crafted romantic drama. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman shares a side anecdote. While not from India, it speaks to a similar archetype. A French noble once wrote of a favored courtesan. She knew more about politics than my advisors and more about poetry than my mistress. The point stands across cultures. These women weren't passive recipients of attention. They were directors of the whole show. There's an especially delightful story from oral traditions about Basanti, a legendary courtesan with a strict policy. No gifts unless they make me laugh. Suitors would show up with jewels, only to be handed riddles in return. One man tried to impress her with a falcon. She trained it to retrieve unpaid debts. That's not just seduction, it's management. And yes, the Kama Sutra talks about technique, about the arts of lovemaking, sure, but those sections are oddly understated compared to the emotional preparation involved. You can't just burst in with flattery and hope for the best. You need timing, humor, an understanding of her interests, a gift that shows awareness, not wealth, a gesture that fits her mood. One lesser-known passage even outlines how courtesans should gauge whether to continue seeing a lover. There's a scoring system, like Yelp but for 4th century suitors. Points awarded for consistency, scent, conversational creativity, and yes, willingness to learn from feedback. There's also a fascinating nod to astrology. The Kama Sutra suggests that successful romantic encounters depend on timing, lunar phases, and emotional alignment. A certain constellation might be better for whispered poetry than passionate embraces. Modern dating apps don't even give you moon charts. And here's your quirky tidbit of the night. Courtesans often use coded floral arrangements to send messages. A garland of marigolds meant desire postponed. White jasmine signaled peace or forgiveness. A single hibiscus bloom left on a doorstep, regret, or a challenge. Think of it as the original DM, but you needed to know your botany. And yet, behind the elegance was real risk. These women navigated power dynamics, jealous patrons, sudden reversals of fortune. They were trained, yes, but they weren't invincible. Their freedom was conditional. They had to perform grace under pressure, literally. Historians still debate how much choice courtesans truly had. Were they empowered artists or glorified hostages? Was the Kama Sutra describing reality or a curated illusion designed to soothe male anxiety about intelligent women? The truth lies somewhere in the layered folds of a silk sari. And yet, what the Kama Sutra offers us is a world in which beauty, wit, and skill could, at least sometimes, carve a space for women in a male-dominated society. A space where they weren't just tolerated, but respected. So now you sit back, your cup refilled, the music soft in the background, and you imagine this world unfolding like a play. Each scene tenderly rehearsed, each glance choreographed, each exchange a balancing act of desire, dignity, and danger. You begin to understand, in the world of the Kama Sutra, intimacy was never just about bodies. It was about brains, presence, tone, touch, laughter, and, if you were lucky, a trained parrot named something ridiculous like Lord Mango. And, as you lean into your cushions and watch the scene fade to twilight, you begin to suspect the most seductive thing in that room wasn't the perfume or the poetry. It was the power of someone who understood exactly who they were and why they deserved to be loved well. You blink slowly as the velvet evening begins to settle outside the carved window lattices. The birds have quieted. The fragrance in the room has changed too. Less citrus, more musk, like the shift from daylight laughter to nighttime secrets. You roll over slightly on your cushioned perch, and what you see next isn't a lover or a lounge or even a person. It's a room. A bedroom, to be specific. And not just any bedroom. A bedroom engineered, optimized, and feng shuied centuries before feng shui was even a buzzword. Because if you thought the Kama Sutra was all about movement between sheets, surprise, it starts with the room around the sheets. According to Vatsyayana, desire doesn't just flick on like a torch. It needs context. And your setting, your space, is the first act of the performance. So let's step into the architecture of arousal, as seen through the careful lens of 3rd century domestic design. The Kama Sutra offers instructions on how to build and decorate your pleasure palace, even if it's only a modest one. Rooms must face east if possible, catching the morning light. Walls should be pale, cool colors, think sandalwood cream or light blue. No red. Red is for rage. You want to inspire tranquility, not gladiator vibes. There's guidance on how far the bedroom should be from the kitchen. Not too close, smells distract. And yes, it even mentions plumbing, not directly, but in the form of an area for bathing and an area for applying perfumes, ointments, and colored powders, which is Kama Sutra code for your ensuite better be spa level. One of the most overlooked tips, screens. Thin bamboo or banana leaf screens placed strategically to create suggestion without exposure. It's the peak of an ankle, the silhouette behind a drape. The idea is that hiding a little makes everything feel like a discovery. Now let's talk furniture. Beds, obviously, but not the towering kind with squeaky canopies. Vatsyana prefers low, wide beds with layered cotton mattresses and smooth linens, ideally scented with camphor or jasmine. Overhead, a cloth canopy to shield from insects, yes, but also to create a sense of enclosure, intimacy, safety, like a whisper tent. A bronze mirror should be nearby, not for vanity, but to reflect the candlelight. One anecdote in The Erotic Spirit Through History tells of a wealthy merchant's daughter who insisted her mirror always show a double glow. She believed that shadows and light made the body look like sculpture. Her lovers remembered her room more vividly than her face. And then there are soundscapes, bells, wind chimes, soft instruments, even parrots, again, yes. The Kama Sutra recommends that gentle ambient noise is preferable to total silence, which can make people self-conscious. You want distraction, but elegant distraction. Think silk curtains moving in the breeze, not your neighbor yelling about goats. Let's pause on sound for a moment. There's even guidance on what not to hear. Loud arguments, coughing, children crying. Any such sounds were thought to throw off Kama's delicate timing. Vatsyayana doesn't offer a fix for these, so we can only assume ancient lovers prayed hard for soundproof walls. Now here's your quirky tidbit. According to one fringe interpretation, some Kama Sutra followers built small moonlit gardens next to the bedroom. Not full gardens, just a few potted night-blooming jasmine and a marble bench. Why? Because moonlight upon petals was considered a visual aphrodisiac. Imagine pausing mid-flirt to step outside and smell literal moonflowers. It's cinematic. It's deeply impractical. It's kind of perfect. Back inside, lighting was key. Flames, yes, but soft, trembling flames. Oil lamps with colored mica filters, reflected in polished copper bowls. Nothing too bright. Intimacy fades under harsh scrutiny, Vatsyayana warns. One scholar even argues that the Kama Sutra's emphasis on indirect light parallels theater techniques. Light what you want the eye to notice, shroud the rest in mystery. Historians still debate whether this was widely practiced or just idealized in courtly households. And temperature control? Oh, Vatsyayana thought of that too. A room must not be overly warm, he writes, lest desire turn to restlessness. Fans, breezeways. A water pot kept in the corner to lightly sprinkle on floors and bring coolness. Climate, scent, sound, nothing is incidental. There's even a section about ceiling height. Too high and the room feels like a courtroom. Too low and it's stifling. The sweet spot? Somewhere you could raise your arms fully, but not jump. This wasn't about luxury, it was about proportion. Human-scaled space for human-sized feelings. And because no Kama Sutra section is complete without a story. One tale passed down in temple murals tells of a noblewoman named Kamalini who seduced her tutor not with looks or words, but with how she arranged her reading room. She placed his seat where the breeze hit gently, ensured the oil lamp flickered just right on his face, and had rosewater-soaked linen folded into the cushions. He proposed in less than a week. She declined. Twice. Because yes, design is power. And the Kama Sutra treats the bedroom not as a location for action, but as a character in its own right. You lie back now, imagining your own space redrawn, fewer blinking screens, more intentional textures, a cloth draped here, a bowl of clove-scented water there, not for guests, for you, because pleasure begins long before the first glance. You start to realize that maybe Vatsyayana knew a secret we've forgotten, that a room can be more than a box to sleep in. It can be a mood, a memory, a mirror, and perhaps somewhere in the flickering shadows of your own quiet night, you'll see how intimacy can begin with the corners of a room, and not just the corners of a mouth. The scent in the room shifts again. It's sharper now, fresh, bright, like someone just sliced a lime or cracked open a stick of camphor. You're not dreaming. You're in prep mode. Because the Kama Sutra says before you touch anyone, before even thinking about touching someone, there is work to do, and that work starts with you. Hygiene, grooming, and something we might call ritual self-care weren't optional, they were essential. So tonight, you're going to prepare as someone would in ancient India, not in a rush, not as a chore, but as a sacred act of readiness. First stop, the bath. No rush here. You walk slowly to a low bathing platform made of smooth stone. Servants pour warm water scented with neem leaves and rose petals over your shoulders. You're given a paste of chickpea flour and turmeric to scrub your skin. Not only does it exfoliate, it leaves a faint golden glow. Vatsyayana recommends this before any romantic meeting. Not to impress someone, but because you're meant to feel beautiful in your own body first. Your hair is oiled, not just brushed or tied up, oiled. A fragrant mix of jasmine, vetiver, and coconut is massaged into your scalp. It's thick, luxurious, and meant to linger. After all, hair in this time is not just style, it's a sensory signal. Lovers often buried their faces in it. You smell it before you kiss. You remember it after they're gone. Now we reach the Kama Sutra's famous attention to oral care. Vatsyayana was strangely obsessed with tongues. Tongue scrapers were used daily, followed by rinses of warm water infused with cardamom or cinnamon. Teeth were cleaned with twigs from the neem tree, chosen for their softness and natural antiseptic properties. The text insists your breath be sweet, because kisses aren't just lips, they're flavor. And yes, underarm hygiene. Sweat was considered normal. Unattended sweat, however, was not. You're handed a small ceramic jar filled with sandalwood paste. It cools the skin, dries to a smooth powder, and leaves you smelling like a gentle forest. It's intimacy, forest edition. Clothing, too, was deliberate. You're told to wear soft, breathable cotton or silk, no stiff garments, no loud dyes. Colors had meaning. Light blue for calm, yellow for playfulness, green for flirtation, and white was for restraint, which, depending on your intentions, could go very wrong or very right. Here's your tidbit. The Kama Sutra advises men to anoint their feet with perfume. Not their neck, not their wrists, feet. Because lovers were expected to kneel, kiss, or even massage each other's feet, especially in moments of apology or submission. So yes, sandalwood toes were very much a thing. Foot intimacy, surprisingly big in ancient India. Now that you're clean, clothed, and scented, it's time for pre-game rituals. And no, this doesn't involve playlists or mirror selfies. It involves poetry. The Kama Sutra suggests composing a small verse in anticipation of your meeting. Nothing long, just a line or two. Maybe a riddle, a tease, a metaphor involving mangoes. Words were foreplay, and if you couldn't woo someone with a sentence, what made you think you could do better with a backbend? One tale from Sex with Kings references a nobleman who arrived at a courtesan's home bearing a poem scrawled on palm leaf. She read it, laughed politely, and replied with her own, mocking his handwriting. He reportedly left in a huff. She later admitted he'd have had a better chance if he'd written it in clean Sanskrit. Even accessories mattered. Rings should be modest, anklets quiet. And flowers? Absolutely yes. Worn in the hair or woven into necklaces, they were more than decorations. They were coded messages. A fresh marigold bloom behind the right ear signaled open to conversation. Behind the left, today is not the day. Vatsyayana loved a subtle signal. Now you're nearly ready, but one more step, the mental cleanse. The Kama Sutra stresses that intimacy should never be approached with anger, sadness, or preoccupation. Before entering the bedroom, you're meant to pause, breathe, meditate, even briefly. One verse reads, "Let no thought of coin, kin, or quarrel enter the chamber of union." Translation, don't bring work drama into the cuddle zone. And here's where debate still bubbles among scholars. Was all this prep just a luxury of the wealthy? Or did ordinary lovers in their modest homes adopt these rituals too? Some historians argue the level of detail implies a noble audience. Others point to folk traditions and oral histories that show these habits across many classes, adapted, simplified, but still present. Either way, the message was clear. If you're going to connect, prepare. Don't just throw yourself into someone else's space. Cultivate yours first. Grooming wasn't vanity, it was intention. Scent wasn't indulgence, it was communication. Even today, when things move fast and rituals have shrunk to deodorant swipes and phone pings, there's something almost revolutionary about this slow prep. The idea that you should bathe, not just to clean, but to honor yourself. That you should choose your earrings the way you'd select a line of verse. That maybe, just maybe, a sprig of mint tucked behind the ear means more than a selfie with a filter. And now, as you stretch on the bed once more, your hair softly fragrant, your hands rubbed with rose oil, your tongue tingling faintly from a clove rinse, you begin to feel what Vatsyayana knew so well. You don't become desirable by being perfect. You become desirable by being present. And preparation, when done gently, is presence made visible. You shift your weight gently on the bed, and the mattress sighs beneath you, just the right amount of softness, just the right creak of old wood and well-washed cotton. The preparation is over. Your skin is smooth, your scent is subtle, your mood is warm like afternoon sun through gauze. And now, finally, it's time to meet the Kama Sutra's most whispered chapter, the chapter of types. Because according to Vatsyayana, not all lovers are the same. Far from it. In fact, there are entire taxonomies of desire, systems of sizing up your match based on, let's say, attributes, and not just the ones you show off at a dinner party. The Kama Sutra introduces one of its most famous frameworks, the classification of male and female lovers into animals, not for their behavior, but for their size, specifically, size of certain intimate organs. Men, you're told, fall into three types: the hare, the bull, and the stallion, which some translations prefer to call deer, horse, and elephant, depending on how polite your Sanskrit teacher was feeling. Women, too, are divided into lotus, mare, and elephant cow. You get the picture. This system isn't meant to shame or flatter. It's about compatibility. The idea is simple. Different matches produce different kinds of intimacy. Some pairs are gentle and tender, others are passionate and intense. And a few, well, might require creative positioning and extra cushions. This classification isn't random either. Vatsyayana offers descriptions of how each type behaves, how quickly they become aroused, how long they linger, how deeply they connect emotionally. The elephant man, for example, is said to be slow to ignite, but once engaged, utterly devoted. The mare woman, in contrast, is described as spontaneous and playful, but quick to tire. And here's your curious tidbit. The Kama Sutra doesn't actually recommend that everyone strive to match their partner in size. In fact, it praises lovers who learn how to adapt, how to modify positions, build anticipation, and pace themselves according to their partner's needs. Compatibility, in other words, is less biology and more choreography. Which leads us to the second classification, personality types. Yes, Vatsyayana dives deep into the emotional and behavioral tendencies of lovers. He describes some as shy and reserved, others as bold and talkative. Some are quick to jealousy, others need constant reassurance. The Kama Sutra, in many ways, reads like an ancient relationship counseling manual. The woman of curious nature, one verse says, should be gently guided with stories, while the man of slow affection must be engaged with perfumes, wine, and soft lighting. And here's the twist no one expects. This book emphasizes communication, not post-fact, not when things go wrong, but before anything begins. You're encouraged to talk, to observe, to listen. One scene passed down through tradition tells of a bride who spent her wedding night simply touching her husband's wrist, observing how he reacted to pressure, warmth, and rhythm. They didn't speak. They just listened to skin. There's even advice on how to recognize when someone is faking interest. A partner who sighs too often, who avoids eye contact, or who praises the same thing too many times? Suspicious. The Kama Sutra urges honesty, but it also prepares you to spot the theater of false affection. Michel Foucault, in his analysis of sexuality across cultures, was fascinated by this part of the text. He noted that while European manuals obsessed over control and sin, the Kama Sutra focused instead on patterns, natural rhythms, observed tendencies, and mutual understanding. To know someone intimately was to know them, to study them, and not just in the bedroom. Of course, this system wasn't without problems. Historians still argue whether these types reinforced gender stereotypes. Did they oversimplify the complex fluidity of human desire? Probably. The categories feel neat, but real people never are. Still, for its time, the Kama Sutra was unusually empathetic. It didn't mock smallness. It didn't shame passivity. It simply said, know what you are, know what your partner is, and move accordingly. A particularly cheeky story in The Erotic Spirit Through History describes a matchmaker who claimed she could read a man's type by the way he handled fruit. Her theory? Bull types broke mangoes in half, deer types peeled them slowly, and elephants just drank the juice. She had a 60% success rate. Not bad for the 4th century. Now, why does any of this matter today? Because we still ask the same questions. Am I enough? Do we match? Can I meet their needs? Do they even know mine? And while modern culture may have traded palm leaf charts for dating profiles and compatibility quizzes, the longing beneath it hasn't changed. The Kama Sutra reminds us that connection isn't just spark. It's symmetry. It's listening. It's adaptation. Sometimes it's accepting that you're a playful hare trying to love a meditative elephant and learning to love anyway. So tonight, as you roll over and feel the slow comfort of breath and linen and maybe memory, you begin to think of yourself not as a fixed type, but a blend of them all. Curious, careful, playful, steady, and maybe, just maybe, the person who understands your mango eating habits is out there too. Or maybe they're already here, just waiting for the right poem, the right pause, the right pattern. You're leaning now, propped slightly on one elbow, that perfect in-between position of lounging and alertness. Outside, the moon's begun its climb, bright, full, soft like ghee melted over fresh bread. Inside, the candle flickers beside a bronze tray of rose petals and cloves, and you're not alone. Or rather, you are. But the Kama Sutra would argue otherwise, because even in solitude, you're surrounded by a secret alphabet of affection, the hug that lingered, the kiss remembered, the graze that said more than speech. And tonight, we enter that warm, wordless terrain. This is the section the translators often rushed. They gave it silly names, bites and embraces, the arts of kissing, preliminary fondling. But Vatsyayana didn't treat these as foreplay. He treated them as a language. It begins with hugs. Not one kind, 8 kinds. Yes, 8, each with its own symbolism, mood, and ideal timing. There's the touching hug, where only the hands meet. The clasping hug, full body, silent. The swooning hug, reserved for lovers who haven't seen each other in days and act like fainting is a compliment. But most importantly, there's the twining hug, where limbs wrap, breathing sinks, and you're no longer sure whose heartbeat you're hearing. This, Vatsyayana says, is the hug that should be practiced in silence, with eyes half closed, not to heighten desire, but to melt fear. And here's a curious aside. In some regions of India, the twining hug was painted into temple walls, not in bedrooms, but in spaces where people prayed for fertility and calm. Some scholars suggest this wasn't erotic at all. It was spiritual, a pose of surrender, a visual mantra of trust. Then we move to kisses, not a one-size-fits-all situation. The Kama Sutra outlines several varieties, from the gentle peck to the devouring kiss, where one partner consumes the lower lip of the other with soft murmurs. There's even the interrupted kiss, where the lips part suddenly, as if to say, I want to say something, but maybe I shouldn't. But it doesn't stop there. Vatsyayana gets incredibly specific. The nominal kiss for first-timers, the throbbing kiss, you figure it out, and the transferred kiss, where a woman kisses the mirror and then asks her lover to kiss the reflection. Yes, that's a thing. And it's oddly adorable. This is where the Kama Sutra shifts from text to texture. It teaches tempo. You're not just reading instructions, you're learning a rhythm. Vatsyayana reminds you that touch must be tuned to breath, that kisses should respond to mood, that the most skilled lovers are those who mirror rather than dominate. He even includes a warning. Do not kiss too quickly, lest the soul flee before the lips. A dramatic line, sure, but it makes you slow down, makes you think of that one person whose kiss didn't feel like consumption, but invitation. Now let's talk bites. Again, not the ouch kind. These are symbolic, playful, artistic, named like constellations. The hidden gem bite is placed where clothes usually cover. The coral bead bite, right at the collarbone. The Kama Sutra even encourages naming your bite marks. Not aloud, necessarily, but in memory. This, you might think, was the moment I knew. In the erotic spirit through history, there's an anecdote about a princess who trained herself to bite in such precise patterns that her lovers believed they were birthmarks. One general reportedly wrote home, "She left me marked like a sacred tree." Whatever that meant, he was smiling when he wrote it. And here comes the tidbit you didn't ask for but now can't forget. According to one fringe interpretation, lovers in some regions used saffron paste to color bite marks intentionally, turning them into designs, temporary tattoos of affection, drawn in the heat of the moment, worn like secret sigils. But all these techniques, hugs, kisses, bites, are never meant to stand alone. The Kama Sutra weaves them together into something Vatsyayana calls the dance of union, a sequence flexible and flowing where each gesture builds on the last. You don't rush it. You don't repeat it by rote. You feel your way through. Michel Foucault once mused that modern intimacy often obsesses over climax, but forgets about cadence. Vatsyayana, by contrast, obsessed over cadence, knowing the ending would take care of itself. Historians still argue whether this emphasis came from Hindu ritual culture or simply personal wisdom. But the result is the same. Don't skip the music. There's even advice on how to pause properly. Yes, pause. A moment to breathe, to laugh, to notice the sheen of sweat on a shoulder or the way your partner's eyes flutter when you whisper their name. Let silence speak, Vatsyayana writes, for silence in union is more eloquent than noise in war. And here's your mandatory anecdote. A courtesan named Samudra was known not for her looks nor her singing voice, but for her gift of stillness. Her lovers claimed that she could hold a hug so still, so patient, that it felt like being held by the ocean. She never married, never needed to. She said her true partner was rhythm. As you lie back again, you might begin to sense that all of this elaborate taxonomy of human contact, isn't about seduction. It's about recognition, a slow honoring of presence, a ceremony of touch, where even the smallest gesture, an arm looped gently around a shoulder, becomes sacred. So tonight, if someone wraps around you softly, or if you find your pillow shaped like memory, let the rhythm slow. Let the breath guide you. Let the room quiet, for the dance of hugs and kisses never truly ends. It simply pauses in warmth. The night has fully arrived now. No more golden light through lattice windows, only soft lamp glow and the occasional flicker of flame playing across a copper water bowl. The air is thick with quiet, like it's holding its breath with you. You stretch your fingers gently, maybe curl your toes into the fabric beneath you, and you wonder, how exactly did the Kama Sutra become so acrobatic? Because let's be honest, if someone says Kama Sutra, your brain likely jumps straight to those famous positions, the backbends, the twists, the mid-air embraces that require core strength and divine intervention. But here's the thing, the actual Kama Sutra is less Cirque du Soleil and more meditative choreography. Yes, it contains positions, but not for the sake of novelty or spectacle. These poses are described with a purpose, balance, pleasure, and adaptability. Let's begin with the standard positions, or what Vatsyayana calls common unions. These are gentle, grounded, built for connection more than display. You're on a soft bed, angled so that eyes can meet, breaths can synchronize, fingers can trace without straining. Then come the curious positions, the ones with names like clasp of the dragon, splitting of the bamboo, and the milk churn. These were never meant to be goals in the modern gymnastic sense. They were possibilities, physical poems to be explored if, and only if, both partners found joy in the motion. And here's where Vatsyayana's pragmatism shines. For every complex pose, there's often a note like, only if the woman is fond of it, or do not attempt if either partner feels discomfort. The text assumes you'll adapt, not power through. In other words, this is not a manual for domination. It's choreography with consent baked in. Now about the names. Many positions are metaphoric, named after animals, plants, even seasons. The lotus isn't just a seated pose. It's a reference to unfolding, to blooming with awareness. Tiger's pounce? More playful than predatory. A surprise movement, followed by laughter and reset. Laughter, by the way, is recommended throughout the Kama Sutra. A smile before action, Vatsyayana says, is like sandalwood before sleep. And yes, you are supposed to practice these things before attempting them in intimacy. Some chapters recommend rehearsing with a friend or even alone, using a cushion, not because it's silly, because it's respectful to come prepared. There's even guidance on how to move between positions with grace, what modern yogis might call transitions. Here's your curious tidbit. In some schools of classical Indian dance, certain Kama Sutra positions were subtly incorporated into performances, not explicitly, but as symbolic movements of union and surrender. In some temple sculptures, these poses are immortalized not as pornographic reliefs, but as part of life's full spectrum: birth, love, joy, loss, and transformation. Now let's meet our story for the night. A dancer named Lilavati, whose name meant the graceful one, was famous in her city for never repeating a sequence. Her lovers claimed that she moved like poetry, never the same rhythm twice. One visiting prince begged to learn her positions, expecting a list. She handed him a riddle instead. What begins where the breath ends, flows with the river's curve, and folds like moonlight in the palm. He had no idea. She laughed gently and said, "That is position enough." Lilavati wasn't showing off. She was teaching a lesson the Kama Sutra quietly repeats. It's not what you do, it's how you listen while doing it. Now to the scholarly debate. Many modern historians, especially those reading the Kama Sutra through Victorian or colonial filters, dismiss the positions as gratuitous. Eastern indulgence, they sniffed. Uncivilized art. But later scholars, especially post-Foucault, re-examined these movements as non-verbal communication systems, a way for bodies to express what words might fumble. Foucault himself was fascinated by how pre-modern cultures codified pleasure, not as deviance, but as dialogue. And in the Kama Sutra, physical intimacy is indeed a conversation. You don't leap into the milk churn because it looks cool. You try it because your partner's breath deepened during the last pose, their eyes widened in that certain way, and your palm on their hip said yes before either of you spoke it aloud. There's even a position of reconciliation listed, a soft and folding shape meant for lovers who've quarreled. You hold each other, chest to back, breathing in tandem. No words, just proximity. Vatsyana believed this restored emotional balance better than apology alone. And now another delicious tidbit. In some homes, particularly among artistic communities, lovers had illustrated scrolls of these positions, not as pornography, but as gentle reminders. These weren't pinned on walls but tucked into carved boxes or folded into drawers. One archaeologist in Gujarat found such a scroll alongside poetry and sandalwood paste. Love, in all its forms, nestled together. You realize, lying in the hush of your own quiet space, that maybe we've misunderstood the Kama Sutra not because it's explicit, but because it's intimate. Too intimate for a world that prefers spectacle to subtlety. Too tender for a society that rushes touch without first mastering stillness. So tonight, if you shift in bed, let it be with awareness. If you stretch your arm, let it trace the air like a dancer. And if your heart remembers a gesture, a real one, a specific movement that once made someone feel seen, let it linger. Because Vatsyana knew what most of us forget. Positions aren't for impressing, they're for expressing. And the best ones are never in the book. They live in breath, in rhythm, and in the unspoken murmur of skin saying, I'm here. The air has grown even quieter now. That deep, velvety kind of hush that makes every small sound feel important. The creak of your bed frame, the soft shift of fabric over skin, the occasional whisper of wind brushing against the wooden slats of a shutter. You're alone, but not lonely. Because in the world of the Kama Sutra, even solitude is populated with memories, strategies, observations, and advisors. Yes, advisors. Because as strange as it might seem to modern ears, intimacy in ancient India was rarely a two-person endeavor. It was a community-supported event. Friends, go-betweens, household attendants, even neighbors often played active, if discreet, roles in setting up and sustaining relationships. Which means you didn't just fall in love. You were nudged, assisted, nudged strategically. Let's begin with the Saki, or female friend. This figure appears again and again throughout the Kama Sutra as a confidante, a messenger, a stylist, and sometimes a cunning strategist. The Saki knew your moods better than you did. She helped pick your clothes, interpreted dreams, composed your reply poems, and sometimes even delivered them, slipping folded verses under flower pots or inside fruit baskets. Think best friend meets private investigator meets crisis communications manager. One of the most famous Saki stories is of a woman named Keshavi, who reportedly arranged not just one, but 3 marriages for her friend, all with the same man under different terms to satisfy family politics. Each ceremony had a different outfit. None of the in-laws caught on. Keshavi later opened a matchmaking school. Legends say she charged in mangoes. But the Saki wasn't always female. Male advisors appeared too, especially for noblemen or traveling merchants. They were expected to understand poetry, politics, and perfume. An advisor might whisper which gifts were most appropriate based on a woman's horoscope, or which verse would soften a letter of apology. One particularly famous bedroom diplomat was known only as Ranga. He reportedly taught an entire palace staff how to prep a bedroom based on lunar cycles. Carpets changed with the moon. No one knows if it worked, but morale was high. And let's not forget the maidservants. Far from passive onlookers, they were often key observers and intermediaries. In fact, the Kama Sutra includes an entire chapter on how a clever maid might arrange a first meeting between lovers by creating coincidence, stirring jealousy, or simply saying, "My lady dropped her sandal, would you care to return it?" Which is elegant code for, "She's interested, but only if you're good with shoes." There's even a section that encourages women to train their servants in reading emotional temperature. Were the cheeks flushed? Did the tone shift? Was the breath different when one name was mentioned? This wasn't paranoia, it was emotional literacy. And in a time when public declarations were rare, these tiny signs carried everything. Now here's your quirky tidbit. In some regions, courtyards were designed with acoustics in mind, not to eavesdrop, but so that private singing lessons could be overheard. Why? Because romantic interest often began through voice. A man might pause mid-walk when hearing a woman sing from behind a screen. If she adjusted her raga to his favorite scale, that was the answer. Historians still debate how common this level of orchestration was. Some argue it reflects elite circles only, a kind of palace intrigue meets romantic theater. Others point to folk traditions that preserve similar practices. Grandmothers who accidentally introduce two market-goers, friends who conspire with spice vendors to deliver love notes with cardamom. There's a quiet universality in wanting help to make the first move. The Kama Sutra doesn't treat this social choreography as meddling. It treats it as wisdom. Because desire, left unshaped, can turn chaotic. But desire, guided gently, becomes art. One story from Sex with Kings recounts a Mughal noblewoman who had two attendants whose sole job was to read her suitors' letters and guess which ones were sincere. They used a 5-point system: originality, rhythm, sincerity, handwriting, and ink scent. Yes, ink scent. The winner? A slightly crooked letter with no rhyme, but folded in turmeric-scented parchment. Honest men, she said, smell like kitchens. And this brings us to one of the most peculiar features of Kama Sutra culture: bedroom gossip. Gossip wasn't just idle chat, it was a tool, a currency, a warning system. If a man left a woman's house too quickly, if a gift was returned unopened, if a musician was sent home early, whispers spread. And so Vatsyayana suggests, protect your allies. Treat your advisors well. Share just enough truth to keep their loyalty, but not enough to risk exposure. And here's where Michel Foucault re-enters the frame. He noted how ancient societies often dispersed sexual knowledge across a community, rather than centralizing it in the church, doctor, or expert. In the Kama Sutra world, intimacy wasn't managed from above, it was navigated laterally. Friend to friend, aunt to niece, maid to mistress. It was lived, not dictated. Of course, this system wasn't flawless. Manipulation happened, secrets slipped, sometimes a friend became a rival. But the Kama Sutra acknowledges that too. There's an entire chapter on what to do when your advisor betrays you. Step 1, stop sharing poems. Step 2, burn the ones you received. You lie back now, listening to the faint crackle of the oil lamp, and you realize intimacy, like architecture, isn't built alone. It's shaped by whispers, by glances caught across a courtyard, by friends who know when to say, "You should wear the green tonight." So if you've ever had a friend pick out your outfit, edit your text, say, "Trust me, this is the one," you've lived a version of the Kama Sutra. And tonight, maybe you'll dream of silk sandals dropped strategically, of mango-scented matchmakers, and of the quiet wisdom of those who stand just outside the bedroom, but shape what happens inside. The fan above you hums a soft, hypnotic rhythm now, its blades slicing the silence into slower pieces. You breathe in, you breathe out, and if you listen carefully, you might almost hear the soft chick-chick of gold bangles, light clinking in the next room, the sound of someone dressing or undressing or just hesitating. Tonight we're stepping into the most complicated chamber of the Kama Sutra, the one marked wives. Now, let's be honest. The idea of a manual telling wives how to behave raises eyebrows in 2025, and rightly so. But the Kama Sutra's approach to married life is not what you might expect. It's part householder handbook, part etiquette guide, and part, well, emotional playbook. The chapter is titled The Conduct of the Wife, and it opens not with rules, but with roles. The wife, Vatsyayana writes, is the keeper of the household's rhythm, not its servant, not its decoration, its rhythm. She is responsible for maintaining harmony, timing the rituals, balancing pleasure with order. She prepares the perfumes. She chooses the bedding. She trains the parrot. Yes, the parrot again. But she is not alone. The wife, according to the text, should be educated. She's expected to know poetry, music, medicine, ethics, even finance. She manages the household staff. She hosts visitors. And if her husband is away on pilgrimage and trade or just moody, she maintains social balance. In short, she's not just a romantic partner, she's a co-strategist. Now here's the twist. The Kama Sutra doesn't assume marriage is always romantic. In fact, it assumes most marriages are arranged, which means the section reads more like advice for building love rather than celebrating it. You don't fall into it, you construct it, slowly, carefully, like setting up a delicate altar. There's an anecdote about a noblewoman named Satyavati who married at 16 into a household she had never seen before. On her first morning, she was expected to bathe, dress, and serve her husband a small bowl of saffron rice. She did so in total silence. On the third day, she added cardamom. On the seventh, a slice of fig. On the 10th, he asked her what the fig meant. She said, "That you noticed." They were married 30 years. Now comes the sticky part. The Kama Sutra does offer instructions on obedience. It says a wife should not speak ill of her husband, that she should follow his will, even when she disagrees, that she should not show anger openly. To the modern ear, this lands like a slap with a velvet glove, gentle but sharp. But here's where things get interesting. In nearly every case where obedience is advised, the text also offers exceptions. If the husband is cruel, if he forgets her needs, if he takes a courtesan without consent. In these cases, the wife is encouraged to withhold affection, seek counsel from elders, even arrange for her own pleasure discreetly. Yes, discreetly. Because the Kama Sutra doesn't view women as passive recipients of love. It views them as emotional tacticians. A wife, it says, may shape her husband's affections through rhythm, perfume, and soft opposition, which is basically ancient Sanskrit for, you don't have to yell, just rearrange the cushions and serve his favorite fruit to the neighbor. In The Erotic Spirit Through History, there's a passage that speaks to this quiet power. It describes a married woman in ancient Benares who responded to her husband's wandering eye not with jealousy, but with ritual. She changed their evening bathing order, lit jasmine oil an hour earlier, wore the color he once complimented 3 summers ago. Within days, he returned, bewildered. She said only, "The moon returns when the tide is right." So subtle, so direct. The Kama Sutra also advises husbands. They are told to treat their wives with dignity, to praise her even when others are present, to never force, never belittle, never interrupt. In fact, Vatsana writes that a husband who speaks over his wife in the presence of friends loses not only her respect, but their laughter. And here's your quirky tidbit. One rare commentary on the Kama Sutra includes a note about sleeping arrangements. Some households kept 2 beds, one for conversation and play, and another for rest. This wasn't about separation, it was about intention. You don't argue where you kiss, you don't negotiate chores where you nap. It's oddly modern and oddly useful. Now let's acknowledge the tension. Historians still debate whether the Kama Sutra truly empowered wives, or whether it merely wrapped traditional roles in silk. Was it a blueprint for equality or a gilded cage? Scholars disagree. Some say the presence of female voice in the text, advice written to women, is progressive. Others point out that many of those same voices are framed through male interpretation. Michel Foucault noted that power often hides in form, and the form of this chapter, structured, polite, formal, hides a very real struggle. How to be respected when the world sees you as someone else's ornament. And yet, there is tenderness here, real tenderness. When Vatsyayana describes a successful marriage, he doesn't talk about dominance. He talks about laughter, about shared baths, about the glance that ends a quarrel. One line reads, "If the husband is fire, the wife must be fragrance. They burn together or not at all." You turn slightly now, the pillow catching the curve of your neck, and you imagine being in such a union. Not perfect, not poetic, but present. Someone who notices your jasmine oil. Someone who remembers that you don't like figs, but left one in your bowl anyway, just to tease you. And if tonight you sleep alone, the Kama Sutra still speaks to you. It says, love is rhythm. Build it gently, with saffron, with silk, with silence that speaks. You've made it past the threshold of structured matrimony, past the neatly laid out expectations, the shared beds, the saffron-scented harmony of domestic bliss. And now we open the little side door. The one Vatsyayana labeled with delicate care. The one behind which all the murmurs, the side glances, the coded poetry happens. Tonight, we step into the world of secret affairs. Let's get this straight. The Kama Sutra does not encourage infidelity, but it doesn't exactly moralize about it either. It acknowledges the reality of longing, the ache that exists outside of vows and rings. And so, being a thoroughly practical book, it offers guidelines on discretion, on timing, and yes, on the art of romantic espionage. Affairs, Vatsyayana writes, must be planned, not lustful accidents, not wild impulsive liaisons. You are advised to observe, to listen, to decode. Does the glance linger? Does the tone shift when you approach? Is there a silence that fills the space like a velvet curtain? Then and only then you may proceed to send a message. But not just any message. A fruit with initials scratched in clove, a poem written in riddle, a gift with a hidden meaning, turmeric for longing, sandalwood for patience, a rose cut diagonally to say I can't wait. And here's your delicious tidbit. Lovers in ancient India often used bird calls as signals. A certain trill outside a window meant I'm near. A low coo meant be ready. One story tells of a potter's son who learned to mimic a dove so well that he delivered notes by voice alone, warbling beneath balconies at dusk like a human telegram. There's also the matter of secret meeting places. These are carefully chosen. The garden pavilion during moonrise, the hallway outside the herb cellar, the terrace during incense hour when everyone's too drowsy to notice. The Kama Sutra even mentions the shadow of the banyan, a poetic euphemism for a hidden spot behind the old temple. And let's not forget the messenger, usually a maid or a loyal friend, or in one fantastic case, a parrot trained to say exactly one sentence. The parrot's line, the stars approve. That's it. That's the whole job. Now for a true historical anecdote. In the erotic spirit through history, there's a passage about a widow named Chanda who lived in Varanasi. After her husband's death, she moved to a small home by the river. Her lover, a traveling scholar, used to visit once a month, but instead of knocking, he'd release a scented silk ribbon into the water upstream. When the ribbon floated past her veranda, she'd know he was waiting on the opposite bank, under the neem tree. No words exchanged, just scent and current. The Kama Sutra also lists strategies for maintaining discretion. Lovers are warned not to change their routines drastically, not to wear new clothes too often, to avoid sudden cheerfulness which might raise eyebrows. Do not comb your hair twice in a day unless you wish to be followed, one verse warns. Because nothing screams, I'm seeing someone, like suspiciously excellent grooming. It even outlines timing. The ideal affair, Vatsyayana says, begins with observation during a festival. Why? Because crowds provide cover, because rituals distract elders, and because joy is a natural amplifier of affection. You don't confess your feelings during taxes. You do it during fireworks. Of course, all this secrecy begs a question. Why go through the trouble? For passion? For revenge? For companionship? Historians still debate the true social function of extramarital love in ancient India. Was it rebellion? A quiet form of self-expression for those trapped in loveless marriages? A release valve for a society that demanded outward restraint but simmered with internal heat? Michel Foucault would argue these affairs weren't just about desire. They were about power, about navigating control in a system where women's lives were tightly circumscribed. A well-managed affair could be a form of autonomy, a statement not of scandal, but of presence. And Vatsyayana, oddly enough, seems to agree. He describes the ideal lover not as the boldest or most passionate, but as the most attentive, the one who notices your moods, who waits for the right moment, who dares not take, but invite. There's a humility baked into the secrecy, a softness, a whisper instead of a shout. Now here's your nighttime story. In a small town near Mathura, two lovers met under the pretense of borrowing cooking spices. Every Thursday, one would knock and ask, "Do you have asafoetida?" The other would reply, "Only if you need it finely ground." And that was their code. No poems, no parakeets, just a spice with an awful smell and a secret worth its weight in jasmine. Eventually, they stopped needing words at all. She would leave a pinch of spice at the edge of his garden wall. He would respond by washing the clay jar and returning it warm. Their entire affair happened in silence and seasoning. So now, as you lie still and feel the weight of your own quiet heart, maybe you'll think of all the hidden languages we speak, the glances, the pauses, the extra moment brushing past someone's shoulder, the note never sent. And if there's someone you long for, even silently, the Kama Sutra would say, there's art in that too. The night is deeper now. That heavy-lidded hour where time moves slowly, like honey sliding down the edge of a bowl. Even the lamp flickers less, tired perhaps, or just respectful of the hush you've wrapped yourself in. You shift a little and your fingers brush the edge of your blanket, smooth and familiar. But tonight's chapter is not about the familiar. Tonight, the Kama Sutra opens its pages to the fluidity of gender, a topic that might surprise you, because buried within its inked verses and flower-strewn metaphors is a quietly radical truth. Not all love fit the neat boxes of man and woman. And Vatsyayana knew this. The Kama Sutra contains references, not frequent but present, to third-gender individuals, known in various regional texts as Tritiya Prakriti, Napumsaka, or later, Hijra. These were people who did not conform to the binary understanding of male and female. And far from being invisible, they existed within society, sometimes celebrated, sometimes marginalized, but always there. You begin to see this in the way the text discusses roles, not identities. Vatsyayana was far more interested in who is receiving and who is giving, who initiates and who responds, than in anatomy. In fact, in one chapter, he describes a type of relationship in which a man plays the part of a woman, and another man responds to him as a woman would. There's no condemnation, no footnote of shame, just description. This was for its time extraordinary. Now let's be clear, the Kama Sutra still comes from a hierarchical world. Not everyone had the same freedoms, but within its categories of pleasure, there was room, however narrow, for non-binary desire. One passage, often glossed over in modern translations, describes oral acts between men, referring to the participant as a kliba, a term historically loaded, sometimes respectful, sometimes mocking. Vatsyayana does not mock. He observes, he records, and crucially, he includes it. Michel Foucault once pointed out that silence in history is rarely accidental. So when a text this old speaks even briefly about queer love, it means someone insisted it not be forgotten. And here's your curious tidbit. In certain temple carvings, especially in Khajuraho and Konarak, there are figures whose gender is deliberately ambiguous. Slender waists, strong arms, tilted chins, and partners whose bodies mirror them exactly. Some historians argue these are simply stylistic choices. Others believe they represent fluid partnerships, captured in stone with no caption, no label, just form and feeling. Let's meet one such figure. An individual named Vamachari, a dancer and poet in the court of a small kingdom near the Narmada River. Vamachari was assigned male at birth, but dressed in silk skirts, wore eye kohl, and performed love poetry in a voice described as neither thunder nor flute. Their most famous verse ends with the line, "Call me flame, not wick, I burn for all." They are rumored to have loved both men and women, to have tutored princesses in song and princes in movement. Their lovers referred to them simply as beloved without pronoun, and when they died, they were buried with a single copper bowl of rose water and a poem etched on banana leaf, "May your soul know no edges." Now let's talk about the Hijra communities. These groups, often composed of transgender or intersex individuals, have existed in South Asia for centuries. The Kama Sutra doesn't name them directly, but later texts and commentaries often reference those born in both forms. And in many regions, Hijras served in courtly roles, as singers, spiritual figures, even guardians of the women's quarters. They lived at the edges, but with purpose. And here's your unexpected fact. In some traditions, Hijras were invited to bless newlywed couples on their wedding night. Why? Because they were seen as closer to the divine, as existing between worlds, male and female, sacred and earthly, silence and speech. Their blessings were thought to carry balance. Modern scholars still debate how open Vatsyayana truly was. Did he embrace fluid identities, or simply record them as curiosities? Some say his neutrality was progressive. Others argue he played it safe to avoid backlash from more conservative voices in society. One thing is clear. The Kama Sutra never claims that only a man and a woman can experience Kama. It never says that desire has one form. It never defines love as straight lines on a chart. Instead, it gives you gestures, movements, silences. It gives you a dancer who can't be named, a carved figure whose eyes match yours, a whispered blessing from someone wearing both bangles and a blade. And now, as you breathe into this space, this fluid, sacred space, you might wonder about your own shape, your own rhythm. Maybe you've always known it. Maybe you're still finding it. Maybe you've never had words for it, and maybe that's okay. Because Vatsyayana, writing in candlelight all those centuries ago, left room in his scroll for ambiguity, for longing that didn't wear a label, for love that existed between the folds of language. So tonight, whether you feel like thunder or flute, wick or flame, know this: there is space for you in this ancient book. There always was. You inhale deeply now, the air tinged with something richer, like roasted spices and sweet oil, faint but unmistakable. Your mouth waters a little, involuntarily, and your belly hums the softest suggestion. Because no matter how lofty the Kama Sutra gets with poetry and postures, eventually, someone has to eat. And tonight, we turn to that deeply human intersection of food and desire. It's easy to overlook, but Vatsyayana understood something that Michelin chefs and wellness bloggers only rediscovered centuries later, that pleasure begins in the senses, and food is the first invitation. Not just sustenance, not just function, but mood, memory, stimulation. So he dedicates passages to what should be eaten before intimacy. When, even with whom. The ideal meal, according to the Kama Sutra, should be light, aromatic, and slightly sweet. It should not induce sleep, nor should it weigh down the limbs or dull the mind. Heavy lentils? No. Milk stewed with dates, cardamom, and a pinch of saffron? Absolutely yes. And as for timing, Vatsyayana recommends food be shared before sunset if passion is expected afterward. Let no night begin with a full belly, he writes, for full bellies make for idle limbs. But it's not just what you eat, it's how. A shared platter. Fingers, not spoons. The feeding of one another, not as performance, but as signal. The lover who feeds the other gains entry to the heart before the bed, one verse claims. It's tactile, intimate, deliciously ancient. One classic seduction involved a sweet called laddu, rolled from flour, sugar, ghee, and dried fruit, and offered not on a plate but on the palm. The invitation? Take it with your mouth. No utensils. A soft bite, a grin. You can almost taste it now. Grainy, rich, slightly nutty, like childhood and desire mixed into one. Let's meet our story for the evening. A merchant named Arvind once sought to win the affections of a woman named Kalavati, known for her sharp tongue and sharper palate. She refused every gift he sent, silks, perfumes, even pearls. Finally, he asked her maid what Kalavati truly desired. The answer? A very specific dish of rice pudding made with coconut milk, jaggery and crushed nutmeg seed. He learned the recipe, made it himself, hand-delivered it warm. Kalavati accepted nothing else. They were married within a year. Because nutmeg, my friend, is more than a spice. In the Kama Sutra's world, it's an aphrodisiac. Yes, the book contains a whole category of such ingredients. There's ghee, a form of clarified butter said to nourish the body's inner fire. Saffron, which cools and calms while subtly igniting. Black sesame, for grounding and strength. Clove and cinnamon, for increasing the warmth of the blood. Even honey, especially when blended with warm goat's milk, was said to make the heart open like a night flower. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some lovers were known to carry small pouches of spice blend tucked inside their robes: clove, cardamom, dried rose petal, and nutmeg. Before an encounter, they'd chew it lightly, not just for breath, but for taste. The kiss that followed? Spiced, layered, memorable. But it wasn't all sweetness. The Kama Sutra warns against onions, garlic, and anything too sour or pungent as to awaken anger instead of longing. Bitterness had its place, but only when mourning. Desire was a delicate heat, and food had to match. One passage even suggests setting the mood with scented dishes, placing warm rice near an open window to absorb the smell of night jasmine. A literal infusion of ambiance. Let the tongue anticipate the skin, it says, for what is tasted sets the measure of what is touched. Michel Foucault might have called this an early form of aesthetic governance, the body regulating itself through careful pleasure. Historians today debate how widely these food rituals were followed. Were they the province of the elite? Certainly. But folk versions existed too. Jaggery cakes passed between lovers, sugar cane shared in secret, a mango sliced slowly during a walk by the river. And don't forget drink. Wine, in moderation, was permitted, often from grapes, but also made from fermented flowers or palm sap, served in small cups, shared, never chugged. One poetic passage reads, "Wine that is sipped from another's lips returns sweeter than honey from the pot." A bit dramatic, perhaps, but effective. The Kama Sutra even outlines how to drink together, alternating sips, feeding one another drops from fingertips, watching the way your lover lifts the cup, graceful, hasty. Do they pause after swallowing? These details weren't trivia. They were data, emotional temperature checks, clues. And here's one final story before you settle in. In a village near the Vindhya Hills, it said a woman named Meenakshi refused to fall in love. Many tried. One man sent her silk. She used it to filter her tea. Another gave her gold. She buried it in her herb garden. Finally, a quiet cook named Ravi simply asked, "What's your favorite flavor?" She answered, "The bitter one that disappears too quickly." He brought her tamarind toffee made with jaggery and chili. She chewed it slowly, smiled, and said, "Now that is love." So tonight, as your breath slows and your stomach settles, you might think of your own sensual map, not just of touch, but of taste. What flavor lingers? What scent makes you feel most alive? What food do you offer? Not because it fills, but because it whispers. Because in the Kama Sutra's world, pleasure isn't always found in the bed. Sometimes it's in the bowl. The softness in your belly has settled into warmth now, a fullness that's not about food anymore, but feeling. You exhale, and for a moment, the world feels like it's breathing with you. And right here, in this moment between tastes and touches, we begin to glimpse what Vatsyayana was always aiming at: balance. Tonight, we drift into one of the most subtle and most surprising dimensions of the Kama Sutra, the idea that sex isn't just pleasure. It's a path to cosmic harmony. And yes, we're now wading ankle deep into philosophy, but don't worry, we'll keep the water warm. To understand how this works, you have to set aside your modern instincts for categories. In Vatsyayana's world, there is no hard line between the sensual and the spiritual, no firewall between body and soul. Desire isn't dangerous. It's divine if done correctly. The Kama Sutra sits within a larger system of Hindu philosophy that sees life as having four goals: dharma, duty; artha, prosperity; kama, pleasure; and liberation. Each is necessary. Each has its place. And kama, the pursuit of desire, is no less noble than prayer or labor. So yes, intimacy matters, but not for ego, not for conquest, for harmony. One verse reads, "When two spirits join with awareness, the gods smile softly." It's not about conquest. It's about merging, listening, moving together in rhythm until the ego falls away. A form of unity that Vatsyayana believed could lead to peace, not just between lovers, but within the self. You begin to see this in the way the Kama Sutra structures its chapters. It starts with how to live well, how to set up your home, how to dress, how to speak gently. Only then does it talk about the act itself, because desire without grace is chaos. But desire shaped by intention, that's art. Let's take the idea of breath. The Kama Sutra doesn't name it as such, but scholars now believe many of its postures and recommendations mirror early yogic practices. Breathing together, holding silence, matching movements to the rise and fall of the chest. This isn't accidental, it's spiritual. It's about rhythm, not just of bodies, but of being. Here's your tidbit for the night. In some temples in South India, there were sleeping goddess rituals, where priests and priestesses performed symbolic unions, not sexual in act, but deeply physical in symbol. They lay side by side, breathing in sync, symbolizing the merging of Shakti, feminine energy, and Shiva, masculine stillness. Some believe these rituals were inspired directly by Kama Sutra concepts, physical presence as sacred presence. And now, your story. A poet named Raghav in 6th century Kanchipuram once wrote of his lover, not as a woman or a man, but as my mirror and fire. Their love was slow. Years of shared food, shared weather, shared words before ever a touch. When they finally joined, it was in silence. And afterward, he wrote, "It was not my body that was opened. It was the door I had nailed shut inside my chest." Because in Vatsyayana's vision, the body isn't something to transcend. It's something to listen to. It holds messages from the soul, clues about who we are and what we fear. And through tender, rhythmic union, those messages become clearer. This is where the Kama Sutra differs from many other ancient sex manuals. It's not obsessed with reproduction, or performance, or control. It's interested in awareness. Are you present? Are you kind? Do you know what your partner needs? Not just in the moment, but after? There's even a passage about the embrace of forgiveness, a way to hold someone when words won't do. Foucault, always fascinated by power, would likely point out that this kind of intimacy is deeply disarming because it doesn't rely on roles or dominance. It relies on vulnerability, on surrender, not submission, but stillness, an active letting go. And perhaps most surprising of all, the Kama Sutra recommends that lovers pray after intimacy, not to ask for blessings, not to repent, but to express gratitude for the connection, for the safety, for the joy. Let the heart bow, it says, for the union is sacred, though it leaves no temple. There are even suggested chants, short mantras whispered over your lover's shoulder as they sleep. Not declarations, just thank yous. Imagine that. A bedtime prayer not to a god above, but to the presence beside you. And yes, scholars debate whether this was ever widely practiced. Was it real? Or just a poetic flourish from a celibate man trying to make sense of a very carnal world? But you know what? That debate doesn't matter right now. Because the thought of two people lying together, not spent but softened, not restless but real, whispering thanks into the still air, that's worth holding on to. That's the Kama Sutra at its most human. So tonight, if you view love rest beside someone, or even just with yourself, place your hand over your heart. Let your breath move gently. No need to do, no need to change, just be. Because presence is holy, and sometimes the most sacred union is simply stillness shared. The room is quieter than ever now. Even the fan seems to hum more slowly, as if it too has slipped into reverence. Outside, a dog barks once and then falls silent. The moon has climbed high above the roof tiles, silvering the world in stillness. And tonight, in this hush between centuries, we meet a cousin of the Kama Sutra, often confused, often mashed together, but dancing to a very different drum. Let's talk about Tantra. Now, before we dive in, a gentle warning. Modern pop culture has turned Tantra into something it's not. Spa menus, Instagram quotes, yoga retreats, they've blurred the lines until Tantra and the Kama Sutra are practically interchangeable. But here's the truth. They are not the same thing. The Kama Sutra is a manual for living, part romance etiquette, part sensual guide, part lifestyle handbook. Tantra, on the other hand, is a spiritual system, a branch of Hindu and Buddhist philosophy aimed at unlocking divine consciousness. It's less about pleasure and more about presence. It uses rituals, symbols, breath, and yes, sometimes sex as a way to transcend the ego and merge with the universe. But yes, they overlap. Both traditions value attention, awareness, and union. Both see the body not as an obstacle to spiritual growth, but as a vessel of sacred energy. And both believe that under the right conditions, desire can open a door to something deeper. In fact, in some tantric traditions, intimacy becomes ritual. You don't touch your partner with lust. You touch them as if anointing a god. Each movement is slow. Each breath is deliberate. Each gaze is held long enough to quiet the noise in your own head. Let's take the practice of Maithuna, tantric union. It's not about acrobatics or novelty. It often doesn't involve movement at all. It might begin with hours of shared breath. Looking into one another's eyes, sitting cross-legged, touching only fingertips, no goal, no hurry. You breathe in as they breathe out. You listen for their heartbeat through the palm. You melt into the rhythm until the boundary between you begins to blur. And here's your curious tidbit. In some tantric rituals, couples would place a small mirror between them, not to see themselves, but to reflect the space between, that liminal gap where energy flowed. The union wasn't in the kiss. It was in the stillness between the gestures. Now here's the scholarly debate. How much of this is original Tantra, and how much is Western fantasy? Foucault, though he never wrote directly on Tantra, would have been fascinated by how Eastern philosophies were reinterpreted through a Western lens, obsessed with individualism and liberation. Some historians argue that much of what we call tantric sex today is a 20th century invention, built from fragments, idealized into exotic mysticism, stripped of its spiritual rigor. But still, beneath the layers of misunderstanding, the heart of Tantra beats slow and true. Let's meet a story. In a 9th century temple town near Ujjain, a couple named Devika and Arjun practiced Maithuna as part of their weekly devotion. They weren't ascetics. She was a musician. He was a potter. But every Friday evening, after the clay was cleaned and the sitar strings wiped, they lit 3 lamps, anointed each other with sandalwood, and sat facing one another for an hour. No speech, no movement, just presence. One night a visiting monk asked why they did it. Arjun replied, "Because in that hour I remember that she is not mine. She is the universe, and I am its echo." And you feel that now, don't you? That sacred slowness, that vibration behind your ribs, the realization that touch, when given freely and received with reverence, is not just a gesture, it's a revelation. But don't mistake Tantra for perfection. It demands effort, discipline, a kind of internal stillness that few achieve easily. The Kama Sutra teaches how to delight in the world. Tantra teaches how to dissolve into it. Both are valuable, but they're not interchangeable. One is a guide, the other is a journey. Vatsyayana mentions Tantra only in passing, though he borrows from its emphasis on breath and rhythm. His world is more grounded, more human, less concerned with transcendence than with harmony. But you can feel the overlap, especially in the quiet moments after union, the ones where no words are spoken, but everything feels understood. And now as your limbs grow heavier and your breath stretches long and easy, you realize maybe the ultimate lesson here is not Kama versus Tantra, or pleasure versus prayer. Maybe it's this: there is a wisdom in going slow, in touching with care, in pausing not out of fear but respect, in remembering that love, real love, begins with attention. So tonight, as you lie still beneath your softest sheet, maybe don't seek fireworks, seek embers, steady, quiet, glowing beneath the skin. Because whether you walk the path of Kama or the winding staircase of Tantra, the door is the same: stillness, awareness, and a whisper of something ancient waiting. The hour is late now, that wonderful stage where time forgets itself. You've become weightless on the bed, barely aware of the fabric against your skin or the room around you. It's as if you've stepped into that liminal space between dream and memory, where everything is softer and somehow more true. Tonight, we return to something that the Kama Sutra takes quite seriously, and which often gets dismissed or downplayed: female pleasure. Yes, you heard that right. This ancient text, written in a deeply patriarchal society, devotes multiple sections to the importance, variability, and sacredness of a woman's arousal and satisfaction, not as a bonus, not as an afterthought, but as a requirement. Vatsyayana writes it plainly: he who does not give pleasure to his partner does not deserve it himself. And this from a man who never claimed to be a lover, but understood, on some deep philosophical level, that intimacy is reciprocal. So how does the Kama Sutra describe female pleasure? With care, with poetry, with astonishing specificity. It talks about the phases of arousal, the mental, the emotional, the physical, that a woman's passion often builds more slowly but lasts longer, that gestures matter, timing matters, scent, sound, even conversation can serve as gates to desire. It also categorizes different types of women, not in a reductive way, but in an attempt to acknowledge variation. Some women prefer slowness, some enjoy teasing, some are bold and initiate, some need to feel completely safe before revealing anything at all. Each of these is treated with equal legitimacy. And then, it gets surprisingly anatomical. There are, according to the Kama Sutra, 8 types of kisses a woman may enjoy, 6 zones where touch evokes deepest response, 4 sounds she may make, each indicating a different form of pleasure. Some translations get squeamish here. Others translate these sounds as birdsong: dove, peacock, koel, and swan. It's Vatsyayana's way of saying, she tells you how she feels. You just have to listen. Here's your curious tidbit. Bite marks, when left on a woman's body, were considered proof of affection, not as trophies, but as symbols. Some lovers would trace these marks later, name them after stars or flowers, and whisper stories into them. One woman reportedly told her partner that a particular mark on her shoulder was the moon you left behind. Now here's a story. A potter's wife named Nalini lived in a village near the Godavari River. Her husband, while kind, was always hurried: work, market, temple, repeat. Nalini never complained, but she once told her neighbor that the only time she truly felt seen was when he washed her feet with warm water and pressed her toes silently in the evening. She said, "In those 10 minutes, I remember what it is to be a person." The Kama Sutra would understand that. It encourages preparation, not just physically, but emotionally. One passage suggests the husband ask about the wife's day, her mood, her dreams before initiating touch, not as strategy, as respect. Michel Foucault, writing centuries later, noted how the West often reduced sex to control or guilt, while ancient Indian texts approached it as a mirror, revealing both people as they truly were. The Kama Sutra treats female pleasure not as a mystery to decode, but a world to explore with humility. But that's not to say it's perfect. Some sections, especially those on household conduct, drift into prescriptive norms, quiet obedience, domestic routines, unspoken expectations. Historians still argue whether these chapters reflect lived truth or idealized roles. Was the emphasis on pleasing the wife truly feminist, or simply another method of ensuring social harmony? The debate continues, but the tenderness remains. One passage reads, "When the woman closes her eyes, it is not from shame, it is from surrender. Let her not be disturbed." Another offers this beautiful instruction. "Trace her breath. When it deepens, deepen yours." And now the famous bit, yes, the bite marks again. Some lovers, Vachayana writes, would take tiny brushes and paint symbols around the marks left during intimacy. A lotus, a flame, a crescent moon, not to decorate, to remember, because female pleasure once shared was seen as sacred, and sacred things deserve ceremony. Here's one last story before your eyes grow too heavy. In a wealthy merchant's house in Pataliputra, a woman named Daya was known for laughing during intimacy, not cruelly, joyfully, freely. Her lovers, several over the years, each said the same thing. She laughed when she trusted you. One man wrote her a poem. "Your laughter is the bell that blesses the temple of my foolishness." Daya eventually married a musician. On their wedding night, she laughed once, and he cried. So now, as you shift beneath the covers and feel the rhythm of your own breath slowing, remember this. In the Kama Sutra's world, a woman's joy is not a goal. It's not a performance. It's not a checklist item. It is a universe. And the only proper response to that universe is awe. The world outside has gone utterly still now. No footsteps, no night birds. Even the moonlight feels like it's walking softer. You pull your blanket just a little higher, your body warm and your breath deepening. And now, it's time for something strange. Because for all its grace and subtlety, the Kama Sutra doesn't ignore the weird side of beauty. Oh no. In fact, it quietly embraces it. Tonight, we explore the charming, odd, and slightly eyebrow-raising realm of bedroom beauty trends in ancient India. Yes, welcome to the world of saffron-dyed hairlines, blue-stained feet, and beetle shell makeup. Because it turns out, looking seductive in the Kama Sutra era wasn't all roses and loose waves. It was artistry, strategy, and a dash of the bizarre. Let's start with the feet. According to the Kama Sutra, beautiful feet are a gateway to charm. Delicate, well-shaped, soft as lotus petals. Fair enough. But here's where it gets quirky. Some women stain their feet a deep blue using indigo or crushed berries. Why? Because blue feet were thought to symbolize night-blooming flowers, silent, fragrant, rare. Imagine slipping off your sandals and revealing midnight blue soles in a candlelit room. That's not just beauty, that's performance. Moving upward, toes were adorned with rings, not one or two, but sometimes 5 per foot. The soft clink of metal on stone floor, a quiet seduction. Now to the face. Makeup wasn't just enhancement, it was coded. Different styles told different stories. A single black dot painted just beneath the lower lip said, "I dream of someone but won't tell." 3 dots at the temple, "I'm newly in love, don't ask with whom." Eyes were lined with kajal, a mixture of soot, clarified butter, and herbs. But not just for beauty. It was believed to protect from the evil eye, and according to one text, make the glances cut more sharply. Some even added crushed pearl to give the kajal a silvery sheen. Here's your fun tidbit. In elite households, a beetle shell would sometimes be ground to shimmer and mixed into face powder. It gave the skin a faint iridescence, like moonlight clinging to silk. Vatsyayana didn't mention it directly, but commentaries from the 11th century describe faces that glowed like dragonfly wings. Now the hair. Oil was everything. Jasmine, rose, vetiver, applied warm, combed slowly. But there was also the occasional use of saffron paste on the parting of the hairline. This was not just fragrant, it left a faint golden glow on the scalp, believed to attract attention to the forehead, where the bindi rested. And about bindis, yes, they were worn, not only for religious reasons, but to emphasize the third eye, the seat of intuition. In intimate settings, a smaller, paler dot might be worn, signifying openness, not modesty. Let's meet our story. A courtesan named Vali was famous for never wearing the same makeup twice. One evening, she showed up with rose petal blush. The next, she used ground sandalwood and a single gold stripe across her chin. But her most legendary look? She painted her nails with crushed hibiscus, so they gleamed crimson, and dipped her fingers in honey water before greeting her guest. So that he remembers sweetness when he sees red, she said. And yes, the Kama Sutra notices hands. One passage says, "Let her hands be soft and her fingers scent of clove, that she may touch without speaking." Rings, bangles, and even hand tattoos were part of the whole ensemble. Speaking of scent, perfume wasn't sprayed. It was dabbed, layered, and often applied via smoke. A lover might sit in a small tent of fine cloth while scented smoke, made from dried petals, wood chips, and spices, was piped in through a narrow reed. You emerged fragrant, misty, and just a little dizzy. Because yes, seduction could be theatrical. And now the hair again, but this time, unusual hairstyles. Some lovers plaited their hair with silver thread, or wore tiny bells woven into braids, creating a soft chime with every nod. One hairstyle, known from carvings, involved twisting the hair into a low knot, then pinning a single flower, not at the top, but at the nape of the neck, symbolizing humility, or so the poets claimed. Historians still argue whether these trends were widespread or restricted to the elite. Some say they were aspirational, seen in temples, poetry, and court paintings. Others suggest rural women created their own versions using wildflowers, crushed herbs, and dyes made from kitchen scraps. Either way, the intention was shared. Beauty was not just to be seen, it was to be understood. Foucault might have called this aesthetic signaling, using beauty as a form of coded power. You weren't just making yourself lovely, you were broadcasting a message. Look at my blue feet, smell my clove oil, notice my honeyed fingertips, decode me if you dare. And now, your final odd delight for the night. In certain love rituals, it was common to name a body part with a flower, not just metaphorically, literally. A lover might say, "Let me kiss the marigold," referring to the shoulder, or trace the lotus path, meaning the curve of the thigh. The more inventive the naming, the greater the flattery. The Kama Sutra doesn't list all of them, but it does encourage creativity. Because what is beauty, after all, if not a conversation? So now, as you lie here, eyes heavy and mind drifting, think of how beauty isn't just seen, it's made. Slowly, intentionally, with blue soles and clove-scented hands, with laughter and silver-threaded braids. Because in the Kama Sutra's world, being beautiful isn't about being flawless, it's about being memorable. The hours have melted now into something soft and ancient. You don't know what time it is, and that's exactly how Vatsyayana would have wanted it. Because in his world, good things take time. Love, pleasure, wisdom, and surprise plagiarism. Yes, you heard that right. Tonight we drift into the strange tale of the Kama Sutra's copycats, cousins and far-flung admirers, how this gentle scroll from ancient India, whispered across borders, landed in unexpected hands, and spawned a whole international family tree of erotic instruction. Let's start at home. Vatsyayana himself wasn't the first to write about Kama. He drew from older texts, especially one called the Kama Sutra of Bhairava, now lost to time. Vatsyayana's genius was not invention, but curation. He pulled ideas from multiple authors, refined them, organized them, and added just enough commentary to turn them into something new. Think of him as the world's first intimacy editor-in-chief. But after Vatsyayana came many others, translators, rewriters, and downright remixers. As trade routes opened, so did curiosity, and soon, versions of the Kama Sutra began crossing borders, sometimes faithfully, sometimes dressed in completely different clothes. Let's take a little tour. In China, texts known as the pillow books began to appear, collections of erotic wisdom, often attributed to Taoist monks or imperial physicians. They emphasized harmony of qi, yin and yang, and breathing through union. There's no direct evidence that these books lifted from the Kama Sutra, but the overlap is uncanny. Several Chinese manuscripts describe positions with names like the cradle of clouds and two fish swimming, which wouldn't feel out of place next to the splitting of the bamboo, One scholar once wrote, "Either the Kama Sutra traveled further than we thought, or the human imagination is remarkably consistent when bored." In Japan, the shunga tradition flourished during the Edo period. Erotic woodblock prints paired with poetry and gentle, humorous instruction. Again, no proof of direct connection, but a spiritual sibling nonetheless. One shunga artist wrote, "The scent of her breath matters more than the size of her hips." Vatsyayana would have nodded. Here's your quirky tidbit. A medieval Arabic text known as the Perfumed Garden, written by Sheikh Nefsawi, bears striking thematic resemblance to the Kama Sutra. It, too, celebrates pleasure as sacred, includes bite-sized love advice, and features poetic metaphors like the almond of her desire and the paws of the golden camel. The text became wildly popular in North Africa and was banned multiple times in Europe for being too gentle in its vulgarity. And then, of course, we have Europe. During the 19th century, as colonial powers invaded the East, they also began collecting its secrets. One of the most infamous figures in this story is Sir Richard Burton, who produced the first English translation of the Kama Sutra in 1883, cloaked in euphemism, peppered with footnotes, and published under the veil of scientific interest. It was scandalous, repressed, and secretly passed from hand to hand like forbidden treasure. But Burton did something strange. He infused the text with Orientalist fantasies, turning Vatsyayana's calm, respectful advice into a vision of exotic decadence. His version was more perfume, less poetry, and though flawed, it became the foundation for the Kama Sutra's Western reputation: naughty, mysterious, and vaguely acrobatic. Michel Foucault, had he lived a century earlier, would have had a field day. The Kama Sutra was no longer an Indian text. It was a mirror for Europe's own anxieties about sex and control. Even more peculiar are the mid-century Western knockoffs, books like The New Joy of Sex, Tantric Guide to Bliss, and Kama Sutra for Suburban Couples, yes, that's real, which borrow diagrams and vocabulary while ditching everything else. The philosophy, the breathwork, the pacing, the poetry. It was Kama without the sutra. And yet, somewhere in all that borrowing, misreading, and marketing, the spirit of the original survived. You can feel it in small places. A yoga teacher who quotes a verse about balance, a couple learning to breathe together, a novel that includes a quiet scene of hand washing before bed. It's still there, still whispering. Let's meet a story. A librarian in Istanbul named Aylan once came across a battered French copy of the Kama Sutra in the back of a used bookshop. She read it in 3 nights, then began handwriting her favorite passages into a notebook. But she didn't stop there. She translated them into Turkish and Ladino, the 3 languages her grandmother had spoken. Why? She said, because I want every woman in my family to know that their pleasure has history. And that's the truth of this chapter. The Kama Sutra didn't stay bound in palm leaf scrolls. It traveled on ships, in dreams, through forbidden translations and misunderstood footnotes. It was censored, copied, repackaged, and reimagined, but it never disappeared. Historians still argue how faithfully it's been preserved. Was it corrupted by colonialism, romanticized by the West, watered down for comfort? Probably yes to all of the above. But you, lying there now in the gentle dark, have touched the original, the quiet truth beneath the flash, the rhythm behind the diagrams, the wisdom that crossed centuries not because it was scandalous, but because it was gentle. So tonight, remember, sometimes the softest ideas travel the farthest. A poem, a gesture, a blue foot, a borrowed metaphor, a page folded over in a book that someone loved and hid and shared again. The Kama Sutra, after all, was never just one book. It was an invitation. The shadows in the room are thick now, folded like old linen. The silence is so complete you can hear the gentle clicking of your own eyelids when you blink. It's the kind of quiet that feels historic, like you've stumbled into the pause between centuries. And into that pause, a single question floats. What happened to the Kama Sutra? Because for all its elegance and depth, this beloved, whispered, translated, misread, and borrowed text eventually hit a wall, a tall, moralizing, colonial wall. Tonight, we explore what happened when the Kama Sutra collided with censorship, colonialism, and cultural misfire. Let's set the stage. It's the early 1800s. The British East India Company is expanding its control, and with it comes a swarm of governors, missionaries, and social reformers, all eager to bring civilization to India, which in their minds meant shame about sex. The Kama Sutra, which had lived quietly for centuries, copied, recited, painted in temples, was suddenly seen as dangerous. Too frank, too pagan, too brown. It was banned from schools, pushed out of libraries, and stripped from temple murals. In some places, owning a copy became a small act of rebellion. You weren't just reading a love manual, you were resisting a narrative. And here's the twist, the very people banning it couldn't stop reading it. Let's talk about Sir Richard Burton again, the British explorer, soldier, and linguist who secretly translated the Kama Sutra into English in 1883. His version was cloaked in fake scientific language, full of footnotes and pseudo-academic disclaimers. But what he was really doing was sneaking intimacy past Victorian gatekeepers. He even published it under the fictitious Kama Sutra Society, a made-up institution whose only members were the translators themselves. Copies were printed in limited runs, for private circulation only, and quietly passed among England's curious elite like sacred contraband. And yet, despite its underground success, Burton's version was deeply distorted. He stripped out much of the philosophy. He misunderstood key terms. He emphasized novelty over nuance. He turned Vatsyayana's gentle poetry into something titillating and a bit ridiculous. Michel Foucault would have had a lot to say here. He argued that Western societies don't suppress sex. They catalog it, turn it into files, diagnoses, moral campaigns. And Burton's Kama Sutra became exactly that. Not a celebration of desire, but a weird exotic artifact to be studied and scandalized. By the early 1900s, the Kama Sutra had been reduced to its positions, diagrams, illustrations, acrobatic feats. Its spiritual depth ignored, its female perspective muted, its moral gentleness lost in translation. Meanwhile, back in India, colonial pressures had made public discussion of sex taboo. The temple still stood, with carvings of lovers and courtesans frozen in stone, but no one talked about them. A generation grew up believing those carvings were somehow accidental. One scholar even described visiting Khajuraho and being told by a guide, "These are not for you, these are for foreigners." Here's your tidbit. In 1924, a new edition of the Kama Sutra was published in India. It was sanitized, heavily redacted, marketed as a cultural artifact rather than a living philosophy. Some bookstores shelved it under anthropology. Others refused to stock it at all. But not everyone accepted this erasure. In the 1960s and 70s, during the global sexual revolution, there was a quiet Kama Sutra revival. Indian feminists, queer scholars, and traditionalist historians began to reclaim the text, not as pornography, not as cultural shame, but as an ancient voice of consent, care, and complexity. One of them, a woman named Dr. Sushila Singh, wrote, "The Kama Sutra is not dirty, it is delicate. What was censored was not lewdness, but softness." And now, let's meet a final story. A young woman in 1970s Calcutta found a dusty, moth-eaten copy of Burton's Kama Sutra in her uncle's attic. She read it, cringed at the language, and thought, this can't be the whole truth. So she tracked down an old Sanskrit tutor, learned to read the original script, and spent 10 years translating the verses herself. Her name? Kamala Devi. Her translation, still unpublished, was filled with margin notes like, "too beautiful to say in English," and "this verse is about listening, not lust." She taught one class every winter in her courtyard. No blackboards, just cushions, saffron tea, and students willing to listen slowly. So now, as you lie wrapped in your own private quiet, ask yourself, what does it mean when a book is buried, hidden, twisted? And what does it mean when, despite all that, it survives? Because the Kama Sutra did survive. It hid in footnotes, in temple stone, in honeyed phrases passed between lovers, in blue feet, in jasmine-scented hair. It survived colonial shame, Victorian smirks, and every person who said, that book is just sex positions. It outlived them all, and now it lies beside you again, not demanding attention, but offering it, whispering not just how to love, but how to do so with presence, with dignity, with stillness. Let that be your resistance. It's almost morning now. Not quite, but nearly. The sky outside is starting to unblacken, just the faintest dilution of night into something else. And you, wrapped like an ancient scroll in your blanket, are right where you should be, still, safe, and held. This is the final chapter, but not the end. Tonight, we close with what might be the most surprising lesson of the Kama Sutra. Love doesn't have to be perfect to be sacred. In fact, the messiness, the missed cues, the awkward moments, the uneven rhythms, that's part of the ritual too. Vatsyayana, that quiet compiler of pleasure, never promised bliss in every encounter. He knew better. He wrote about disappointment, about repair, about what to do when someone doesn't respond or grows distant or simply isn't in the mood. These aren't footnotes. They're part of the philosophy. Because Kama isn't about fireworks, it's about attention. The Kama Sutra teaches that even failed intimacy can be sacred if it's handled with grace. One passage reads, "When the desired touch is denied, let the hand become still. When silence falls, let the heart not panic." Imagine that, a 1600-year-old text telling you to take a breath and calm down. And it doesn't stop there. The text includes strategies for reconnection, little gestures, sending a favorite scent, leaving a flower near their cushion, writing a line of poetry folded between garments. One suggestion? Braid their hair while they sleep so they wake and remember your fingers. You have to admit, that's better than texting. You up? Now here's a final story. In the outskirts of Varanasi, long ago, lived an elderly couple who had once been famous for their passion. As they aged, the spark dimmed. One day, the man forgot their anniversary. The woman said nothing. That night, he brought her a mango, freshly sliced. No ceremony, just fruit. She took one piece, chewed it slowly, then whispered, "You remembered something sweeter." They were married another 21 years. You see, the Kama Sutra isn't trying to make you better in bed. It's not a self-help manual. It's not a challenge or a test. It's a lens, one that invites you to look more closely, feel more deeply, and approach love with curiosity instead of fear. And historians still argue what Vatsyayana intended. Was he just recording the elite culture of his time? Was he quietly subverting it? Was he even celibate, as some sources claim? It doesn't matter now, because what he left behind wasn't just a manual, it was a mirror. And tonight you've looked into that mirror, not to judge but to notice, to smile, to wonder, maybe even to remember. So let's take stock. You've wandered through incense-thick bedrooms and mango gardens. You've met dancers with no gender, lovers who spoke in flowers, and poets who worshiped silence. You've touched the sacred through shared breath and roasted spices and blue-painted feet. You've read the Kama Sutra with your ears. And now, as your breathing slows and your jaw softens, let this truth settle on your skin. You are allowed to want softness. You are allowed to ask for rhythm. You are allowed to take your time. No matter what the world says, no matter what love has looked like before. Because in this ancient world, you were always enough. And now, before sleep takes you fully, we close with a final wind down. Let your body sink deeper now. Feel the pillow beneath your head, the way it cradles without asking questions. Let your shoulders drop just a little more. No need to hold anything up right now. Not your thoughts, not your plans, not your posture. There's nowhere to be but here. Breathe in through your nose, gently. Hold it just a moment. Let it go like sand through fingers. Now imagine a small courtyard, centuries old, hidden behind a quiet temple. There's warm stone beneath your feet, smooth from years of bare footsteps. Overhead, jasmine vines spill from clay pots. A soft breeze carries the scent of rosewood and cardamom. Somewhere nearby, a fountain bubbles, not loudly, just enough to remind you that water always finds its path. In the courtyard's center is a single lamp, flickering, not for light, for memory. It's a flame passed down from Vatsyayana's hand to yours. Quiet, steady. A reminder that tenderness isn't weakness, it's ancient. And wanting connection isn't foolish, it's divine. As your eyes drift closed, know this. There is wisdom in the body, in touch, in silence. And the Kama Sutra, for all its folds and metaphors, was always just trying to say one thing. Pay attention to your breath, to your longing, to the way your soul hums just before sleep. And now you may let go.